people talk about destroying the planet. We're not going to destroy the planet, not really, right? I mean, over the course of human history, it's been whacked by asteroids and frozen solid. What we can definitely do is destroy its ability to accommodate us, right? We can destroy our habitat.
Hello, and welcome to Working with me, Dan Doriani, hosting a podcast where we explore faith, work, culture, and the way believers can make a difference in their corner of the world. Hello, everyone. My guest today is Elliot Kellner, Director of Commercial Innovation at the Danforth Plant Science Center here in St. Louis. It's an independent nonprofit research organization with unofficial ties to various research universities and a lot of interest in operationalizing science, bringing it into the world in a constructive way in a market economy. I've known Elliot for a number of years. He's a friend of the family, and it's always good to visit. Elliot, I want to let his credentials leak out a little bit over time because they're pretty impressive, and I don't want to make anybody feel embarrassed to be in the presence of such a mind. But Elliot is I'm going to say it this way: he's a master in trees and a PhD in water.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your training and how you got into it, and then later on we'll talk about your turn to the business world.
Sure.
Welcome, Elliot.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah. So how I got into environmental science, I grew up in an ag family, so that's an important thing to say, I think, right at the outset. My mom grew up on a self-sufficient family farm in the Appalachian Mountains, and my favorite childhood memories were all from that farm, right? Running around with my cousins and in the forest and, through pastures and chasing each other through the barns. And I was gifted that love of the outdoors by my family. But, when I went to college, I was 18 and had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I played a lot of Frisbee and I stayed up late, and I think I got a liberal arts degree, which, I don't know what that's really good for, but I was better at reading and writing, I think, when I graduated with my bachelor's than I was when I started, so that's a win. I actually spent some time in the full-time ministry. So after I got out of college, I was a youth pastor at a church up in Buffalo, New York. My father's a minister, and so he was connected with that church, and my mom was on staff there, and so I did a couple years in vocational ministry before realizing that it was very much not for me. I think I bounced around and waffled there for maybe 3 or 4 years, working some awful jobs and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I realized that the one thing that I knew to be true about myself was that I loved the outdoors and I loved being in the woods. And that question that people would ask you, like, well, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I would always answer, I would be a forester, of course. What an obvious answer.
So you started to listen to yourself.
Yeah, eventually, right? My girlfriend at the time, now wife, Lauren, eventually took me aside one day and said, if you don't go back to school and pursue this as a career, you are never going to be happy. I think she was probably right. It's very prescient. So I went back to school to pursue a master's degree in forestry, very much intending to become a forester, right? Spend all my time in the woods, live in a fire tower, measure trees and count them. And then at some point during my master's, I took a left-handed turn into water resource science and realized that, at least for my brain, water resource science, it's a physical science. It's very quantitative. It uses mathematical models to predict how the world is going to function, to try to understand the way that the environment functions. And that made a lot of sense to me, strangely, as a kid who played Frisbee and studied liberal arts. It turns out that math was the way that I understood the world. So my master's in trees turned into a PhD in water resource science. And I circled back a little bit, and most of my research actually focused on trying to understand how agricultural production impacts our environmental water quality, and also water quantity, which is that's a 10-cent way of just describing how much water is in a stream or in a river or in the ground or in the atmosphere at any given time. But so very much kind of coming full circle with those agricultural roots in my family.
That's great. We both live in St. Louis, which is a city with trees. And it's
lots of trees.
Lots of trees. And it's kind of, at one point years ago, you told me fascinating to live in St. Louis because it's sort of a case study in how not to plant trees.
That's right.
As in, people all over the world, to some degree, study how not to plant trees by looking at what we've done in St. Louis. And what we've done, and I want you to comment on this, is plant 2 trees, especially in great numbers, that are really bad trees. One is the Bradford pear, which has been disenfranchised by the Arboreal Institute or whatever because the branches break all the time. And if you put them by the road, they break in the road. If you put them by your house, they break on your house.
And it smells awful.
Yeah, they don't smell good. The flowers are pretty, but they smell bad. And the other one, which in my view is maybe much worse, is the sweet gum tree, which is very beautiful colors in the fall. It's a healthy tree, doesn't give really much shade at all, and every tree creates thousands of gumballs, prickly, sticky,
a massive
messy. Mess. People trip and fall. They break
Gotta wear
their
your shoes
ankles.
in your front yard.
You can't wear shoes in your front. They destroy lawnmower blades. Elliot, tell us how on earth this kind of thing can happen. How do people make mistakes this bad? Since you're a creation care man, right?
Right.
And you want to prevent that, and yet it does happen. And how can you work your way out of a problem like that?
Yeah, that's fun. So it's a good question, right? I mean, planting trees in urban areas, metropolitan areas, suburban, I mean, it doesn't matter. Anywhere people are, planting trees in those places is a way of promoting human health. It can keep your utility bills low if you have shade. It's good for air quality. It's good for lung health, respiratory health. But, we always try to encourage people to plant the right trees in the right places for the right purposes, right? Which is kind of a mouthful for sure. But, people tend to default to what's easiest and to what they know best. And so
these are well-known trees.
They're well-known trees. The Bradford pears look pretty.
They grow easily.
Yeah, they look pretty. They're popular in the South. And so we've ended up with some trees and some spots where we shouldn't have them. If you go to some parts of St. Louis, that small median of grass that's between the sidewalk and the street, about 50 years ago, they planted sycamores all through downtown St. Louis, and those sycamores are now huge, and they are uplifting the sidewalks, and they're uplifting the roads in some spots, and it's, again, a massive mess, right? Sycamores are great trees. They're native Missouri trees. We encourage people to plant them, but it's not a great idea.
Don't put them between.
Don't put them between a sidewalk and a street. That's right. Don't put them right next to your house, right?
Yeah, right.
And we have a lot of really beautiful Missouri trees that can accomplish those same objectives, trees like redbud trees, which are beautiful and flowering. Or if people want shade trees, catalpa is a great native Missouri tree.
You're going where I want to go.
Yeah,
so let's suppose that we live in the Midwest in general, people have kind of cold winters and warm summers, and maybe not the greatest soil.
Some places.
Everybody has great soil.
Yeah, some places.
Catalpa tree.
Yep.
What's another one you recommend?
Ooh, I mean redbud through and through. That's one of my personal favorite trees. If you spend enough time in forestry circles, everybody develops their own favorite tree, right?
Okay.
I'm a big fan of, if people want large, beautiful trees that they will see, shade trees that they'll see grow in their lifetime and are pretty in the fall. The tulip poplar is a beautiful Missouri tree. You shouldn't plant it too close to your house because it can get pretty big, and it self prunes, which means it just drops its lower branches when it's done with them. So you shouldn't put it right next to your house, but it's a beautiful tree.
Put it next to your neighbor's house.
That's exactly right, next to your neighbor's garage. But yeah, so we have a lot of fantastic trees, and there are even trees that get no love from the commercial forestry set, trees like eastern red cedar, which are considered trash trees. But if you own property and you want to plant a fence line and have some trees around it, eastern red cedar is a great tree.
So you have to know your purpose.
It's all about purpose. Yeah. What are you trying to accomplish? We've got trees for every purpose in Missouri. We're pretty blessed with immense biodiversity of trees.
Thanks. You also spent some time with trees in Morgantown, West Virginia, which is a slightly different, geographical, and the water and the temperatures are a little bit different, not totally different. A lot of trees in that part of. We have a lot of trees here, but there's forests everywhere in places like Morgantown.
Yeah, West Virginia.
What would you add? What did you learn in Morgantown?
Ooh, yeah, that's a great question. So I'll bring that back to my water resource work a little bit, because that was fully what I was focused on when I was living in West Virginia. And West Virginia is the most forested state by proportion of land. I think it's like 78% forested, which is amazing.
There's trees everywhere.
So there's trees everywhere. The state is primarily forest, which is amazing because most of that forest was actually harvested during the turn of the 19th to 20th centuries, right? So
replanted.
And it is all second growth forest by and large. So
on the other hand, the water in West Virginia has been treated very badly at times.
Unfortunately, yeah. So
because of strip mining.
That's right. The resource extraction, energy extraction industry has wreaked havoc on water resources in Appalachia. But forest is one of the best ways that we have of actually mitigating some of those impacts, right? So, trees use a lot of water. They suck it up out of the ground, right? Everybody learns that kind of in their junior high and high school science days. And those trees they can bind certain types of heavy metals, certain tree species. And so they can actually be used to, there's a process that, the 10-cent term is phytoremediation, but that's just a fun way of saying that we plant trees in places where there's a lot of contaminants in the ground as a way of actually
removing it from the water.
Yeah,
for one
mitigating.
Thing, yes.
Yep, that's right, and decreasing the availability of those contaminants and those pollutants to actually negatively impact human health or animal
Decreasing
health.
the availability in the sense, in the bad sense of availability.
That's right. In a way that you don't want something available.
Toxic water.
The availability of that poison to hurt you.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's an availability you don't want to provide. That's good. And trees, of course, help. There's a lot of beautiful rivers in West Virginia.
There are.
I've gone whitewater rafting there a number of times. It's fantastic.
Where did you go? New River?
New River, Cheat River,
Oh,
Monongahela River's in there. New and Cheat were my favorites, I think we'd have to say. Anyway, so trees help bring those rivers back too.
They did.
But your study there in Morgantown was with the U.S. Department of Agriculture as well as the university. And when you were doing that was Chesapeake Bay related. Chesapeake Bay is another huge and important waterway and source of water. And what did you do there?
Yeah, so I was on faculty at West Virginia University. So after I finished my doctoral program at University of Missouri in water resource science, I took a postdoctoral research fellowship at West Virginia University that then turned into a faculty position. And the one thing that they never tell you when you pursue a PhD is that from that point forward in your life, you're never allowed to turn down a job offer. So if you're lucky enough for someone to offer you a job as a person with a PhD, you have to say yes.
Unless you published 47 papers, then everybody wants to hire
At least
you.
early in your career, you have
Right.
to say yes. But so thankfully that postdoc fellowship turned into a faculty position. And so I was on faculty at WVU and was a full-time research scientist doing the type of work that we were kind of just teasing at for a number of years, and then was loaned out basically to USDA to provide technical
USDA
support.
is the United States Department of Agriculture.
That's right. And there's a specific agency under that cabinet department called the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which provides, they administer voluntary incentive-based agricultural conservation programs.
Right, let's just
a
unpack
lot
that
of
for a second.
qualifiers.
Voluntary, not involuntary.
Right. So we
you
do not mandate.
Give incentives so
That's
people
right.
will be attracted.
That's right.
To processes and
certain types of ag practices that we know are better for the environment. And the way that we have to approach those goals is very different in the U.S. than it is in, say, the European Union, where they mandate a lot of those agricultural practices. But we don't have sufficient political capital in the U.S. to mandate conservation ag in the same way. And so instead, we entice people to participate in those programs by providing nominal incentives.
Nominal incentives are cash sometimes,
they
or
are
sometimes
typically
will
cash
help
payments.
Typically cash payments, but it might be lending them expertise.
Right,
And this
and
would
it's
include
not
things
wildly lucrative. It's an important thing to underline, right? Like no farmer is getting rich by participating in an NRCS program, but it does make a historically tight margined industry, right, that much more feasible if you are participating in those programs.
So
and
it could
padding your bottom line.
Could enable them to just live a little more comfortably or buy some more equipment and so forth. A lot of that would be then things like fertilizer runoff. Would it be things like pig farming, chicken farming, runoff of?
Sure.
So what would you try to keep out of the Chesapeake Bay?
Oh yeah. So I mean the Chesapeake. That's a great question.
And how does that help the world?
Sure.
of people in, Virginia and West Virginia and Maryland?
Sure, it's a great question. So the Chesapeake Bay, water quality in the bay had declined precipitously over the course of 8-9 decades, and it had gotten so bad that some of the oyster fisheries were basically collapsing. Right. So the oyster industry, which is fundamental to the economy of the Chesapeake Bay region. There are waterman families that go back generations.
And they were,
the industry was collapsing.
And crabs were also being impacted as well.
They were,
some kinds.
And classic fisheries, right? But the water quality had become so abysmal that it couldn't support that type of aquatic life, and importantly, that commercial industry. And so, pursuant to a Supreme Court decision in the mid to late 90s, a multi-institution, multi-agency government effort was cobbled together to try to restore the water quality in Chesapeake Bay. And it included scientists from government agencies, from land-grant universities. I mean, the Chesapeake Bay region, it includes parts of 6 different states.
And it's a large body of water, not real deep, if I remember correctly.
Not very deep.
So, but still a lot of square miles covered.
That's right. But if you think, an interesting thing I always like to tell people about the bay is that the land to water ratio, so the amount of land that actually drains water to the bay, so that amount of land, the ratio of that to the actual extent of the bay is about 14-1. Right, so that's a very high ratio of land to water. And what that means is that the same way that you would use a magnifying glass to intensify the sun's light and start a fire in your backyard as a kid is basically what we're doing with pollutant runoff from those 6 states as it enters the bay. And so it's led to, unfortunately, high concentrations of those.
So it's very different from, let's say, Lake Superior, which is
absolutely.
very, very deep.
And
compared
large.
To, huge and deep. And so you can... we don't want to say this the wrong way, but you can make more mistakes with Lake Superior than with Chesapeake Bay. Is that true or false?
It might have the capacity to buffer those mistakes.
More margin.
That's right.
You might say, yeah.
Greater margin for error.
Yeah.
In the Great Lakes than you would have in the Chesapeake Bay.
Not that we're advocating
We are
carelessness
not.
anywhere. So I like something you said a couple of minutes ago. You said we want to restore aquatic life and the industries connected to that. So what I hear is respect for creation as creation, but also respect for the people who make use of God's creation, right?
Agreed.
So you're trying to take care of crabs and oysters because, we kind of care about crabs and oysters intrinsically because everything God created is good. But we also eat crabs and oysters. And people depend on them. So how do you try to do it? And what's the challenge, if I may, in trying to, you can go too far in the direction of industry, right? And just care about what's consumed and what pays and what creates a job. And you can also go too far in the direction of just saving a species for the sake of the species that takes a turn that forgets the people who live in an area.
Sure.
So talk us through that. How does a practicing scientist do that?
You nailed it when you said that you can err in both directions of the spectrum, right? Like you can preference business creation and firm value and industry expansion to the point where, we have the robber baron era where we're just awash in negative externalities, right? The consequences of that type of
What's a negative externality, just for the ordinary person?
Right, it's the consequences that are external to your organization, right? So that other people have to deal with, even if they were not, even if they're not a customer. That's right. That's right. Even if they're not a customer or a member of your organization, or even inside your value chain,
you're harming society at large.
That's right, harming society at large, right? So. And we've seen that, unfortunately, I think in some ways that's the story of the 19th and early 20th centuries, right? And then we come along and the environmentalism movement is trying to swing the needle back in the other direction. And we're trying to, protect the earth and improve the way that we're stewarding the environment and protect our habitat. But to your point, I would agree. And this places me maybe in a minority of some of my colleagues, but I would agree that we have to make sure that we keep the human element in front of us, right? And I think what I have realized over the course of my work, and this is absolutely informed by my faith, is that for me, I think environmentalism is best interpreted as a form of humanism. And so for me, the reason that I care about the environment is because I care about people. And the reason that I think that the Lord wants me to help steward his environment, his creation more effectively is because he cares about people and he wants those people to have a beautiful habitat to live healthy, self-actualized lives. Yeah. People talk about destroying the planet. We're not going to destroy the planet. Not really, right? I mean, over the course of human history, it's been whacked by asteroids and frozen solid and covered in water and, awash in microbes.
But we can cause a lot of damage.
We can cause a lot of damage.
To the people and the animals that live on this
And
earth.
what we can definitely do is destroy its ability to accommodate us, right? We can destroy our habitat, and then its carrying capacity will not include humans for some time. And we've seen that, we've seen extinction level events over the course of the history of the Earth.
Or maybe could sustain, instead of a few billion people, a few 100,000.
That's right.
Which means a lot of death.
That's right. And that's, that's what we don't want to see. And so it's very much it's that human element. It's that human objective, right? How can I best care for God's people? For me, that's by stewarding the earth, right?
Well, I mean,
it's something different for everybody, but I consider that to be my personal niche, maybe.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, clean water and healthy trees are very important. At this day, there are huge fires raging across North America and causing lots of bad smoke over huge swaths of the continent, and people have breathing problems, are impaired. They're suffering from that. And so we want to take care of the world.
That's
I
right.
like to use the phrase creation care. You probably can't use it much when you're working with the United States government. You have to talk about habitat and environment. But I like to, with my students, with pastors, I like to use the phrase creation care.
My name is John Perkins, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis. In addition to this podcast, we offer 10-hour Faith and Work cohorts and conferences on faith and work throughout the United States. Our goal is to equip both formal and informal leaders to make a difference in their corner of the world. To find out more about CFW and to sign up to participate or lead in one of our cohorts, please visit our website at faithandworkstl.org to see how your church or organization can form a faith and work cohort. At the end of today's interview, stay tuned to hear how participating in one of CFW's cohorts inspired Zac Waggener to make a difference in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, back to Dan.
You're not just doing creation care, you're also in another job now. You're now, if we can switch over to your current task, which is to commercially operationalize the best new science. So you've added to your master's in forestry and your water resource management PhD, an MBA.
Right.
And so what you're trying to do is, you can give me the exact title, but you're the Director of Innovation and Incubation of Ideas at a Center for Ag Tech. So back to your roots in ag, not just as a sidebar, I spent a lot of happy hours on my grandfather's farm. Sounds like your happy hours are a lot like my happy hours.
They were.
At times. I think you probably had more hours than I did because he was a grandfather and he was older, but I get the idea. So you were trying to take new plant technology, water, plant growth to agricultural farms, to farmers, and get it to the people through businesses, incubating small businesses. In the website, it said that you distributed, I think, $4 million to 16 firms. At least at one point, that was a snapshot. That's not a huge amount of money. That's $250,000 each. So how does it work? What do you do?
Yeah, so my role at the Danforth Center as Director of Commercial Innovation, it's a dual role. So on one hand, there's an internally facing component to my work. So I work with, we have 32 separate research teams at the Danforth Center that include 280 full-time research scientists. So we have a vast capacity and a truly globally unique set of expertise in plant sciences. And so I work with those teams to identify commercially viable opportunities, right? Technologies that we think might be able to make it in the marketplace, and then figure out, we look for ways to support that. We have a proof of concept fund where internally, again, with our teams, we offer pre-commercial seed grants to help them develop those ideas and get them to a spot where these research teams could potentially file a patent application.
So in other words, you give people a chance to give you some feedback so they can say that works, that doesn't work. If you made this adjustment on the ground as a farmer, I'm telling you this adjustment would be a good one. Is that what you do or not really?
With the internal research teams, it's I would say further up the value chain than that.
Okay.
We're not downstream enough to be working with farmers directly.
We're not with farmers yet.
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah. But with those internal teams, we're looking for technologies for which there is a market need, right?
Okay.
That is addressing some sort of exigent, unique market need, right? And so maybe they're strengthening a patent application, or maybe the idea, the technology is substantial enough to justify the creation of a new company, a startup, right, that could be spun out of the Danforth Center. So that's one role that I have, the internal role. But then the external role is that I work with ag tech companies, early stage startups, all the way to strategic corporates, and I look for...
Give me an example of, like, who do you work with? Big corporations, people would know.
Bayer, right? Bayer,
Okay.
Monsanto,
Right.
former Monsanto, now Bayer, right? It's a great example. And we look for collaborative research opportunities, places where we can leverage the unique resources of the Danforth Center. And by resources, I mean not just our, top flight instrumentation and our amazing greenhouse facility, but specifically the people, right? The scientists that we have, the expertise that's been collated there. Ways that we can leverage that amazing expertise to support the development of these technologies that can improve the sustainability of agriculture, and then get them commercialized, get them to market as quickly as possible.
Make it sustainable. Well, that means like taking care of the soil for many, many years. Is that what it means? Or what does it mean?
Yeah,
make it sustainable.
So trying to decrease those negative outcomes of traditional agricultural production, which everyone is
like
what we've seen in the Chesapeake Bay, right?
Yeah.
So runoff of pollutants and fertilizer and pesticides and
or killing animals unnecessarily.
Right. Yeah.
Needlessly.
I mean, that's right. There are unintended consequences on regional biodiversity, right? So you might be spreading a pesticide on a field to get a target pest, but then you're killing some
others.
Unintended,
and then
which might be beneficiary.
It might be
right?
the food that some bird we love eats.
That's right. Or it might be a pollinator that we desperately need, right? Like honeybees.
Yep.
And so we're trying to make agriculture more sustainable by decreasing the negative impacts of ag production on the environment. And also on human health. Because to be sure, some of those traditional products that work very well, traditional synthetic pesticides that were really great at killing insects, were also carcinogens, right? And so they weren't just bad for the environment, they were also bad for the farmers that were using them. And so we're looking for better ways that we can accomplish those same objectives while being friendlier to humans.
Yeah, so you're threading that needle. You're trying to take care of the world and people at the same time.
That's right.
Which is, I think, of course, again, we agree where we need to be. Is it hard to work with ag? It's traditional industries, long-standing industries tend to be, the reputation is, a little bit less quick to embrace innovation. Of course, on the other hand, you can't stay in business very long while being a fool. So is it easy to work with ag or not? I'll let you choose that question or the other one. When you said Bayer, Monsanto, some people who would listen to this would probably cringe and say, "Oh, I thought I liked Elliot. Now I realize he's in cahoots with the dark side, Monsanto, those monsters." Maybe we can just agree that every big corporation does a lot of really good things and also maybe makes some mistakes, and Monsanto might fit in that category with every gigantic. Now it's Bayer. Every gigantic corporation. So I want you to comment on both, but you're happy to work with Bayer.
I am, yes. And I would say that working with big strategic ag corporations, ag tech startups, just the industry generally is, I hate to use this word because it sounds trite, but it's easy. It's a group of people that are easy to work with. And I think the reason for that is, that old adage, right? Necessity is the mother of invention. This is an innovation-friendly industry because this is an industry with exigent needs, right? For new products, new practices, new ways of accomplishing the traditional objectives of feeding the world and preserving the environment. So there are real needs, and because of those needs, these corporations, I think, are very open to innovative ideas and
So you
and
answered
ways
both
of
of
doing
my
business.
questions at
Yeah.
once.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Good job. Well, I mean, for those of us who study the Bible a lot, there's that parable of the sower, and the good seed produces 160 and 30-fold what was sown, meaning one seed creates 100 more seeds, or 60, which at that time was a phenomenal yield.
Right.
Phenomenal. 100 to 1 is not phenomenal anymore.
Yeah.
It's not, it's bad. It's terrible. And plant science is, and God gives us our minds to make use of that. Plant science is the way we've gotten there, right?
Absolutely. And, again, kind of going back to what we were mentioning before, right? Like keeping that human element in front of us at all times as followers of Christ, right? Since I consider that to be a key part of my mission here. It is unlikely, as a scientist, you're never allowed to use the term impossible. So let's just say it's highly unlikely that we're going to be able to feed 8 billion people, much less 10 billion people, using traditional modes of agricultural production, right? We're not going to feed the entire world through a collection of smallholder farms that are using no crop inputs or no
fertilizer,
next-gen
for
tech.
example.
Yeah, that's just, it's not going to happen. And so, realistically, the U.S. is the breadbasket of the world. We produce the vast majority of the world's grain. And the reason that we've been able to drive yields so high, and the reason that we're able to feed so many people in the world, recognizing that there are people whose needs are still unmet.
Yes, right.
But the success has been due to scientific innovation. And on the part of...
We also have pretty good soil in a lot of places.
We've got great soil in a lot of places, and we're doing our best to protect it. But those scientific innovations were driven by people working in government labs and at universities and at places like Monsanto, right? There are missional scientists who were at Monsanto who cared about feeding the world, and that's one of the reasons that we can do what we can do now, and why 200 bushel an acre corn is a reality as opposed to a pipe dream like it was 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that you and I both know fervent believers who are scientists at Monsanto, and they're trying to feed people. That's their life's mission.
That's right.
And yes, Monsanto probably does things that get in the paper in a way that doesn't cast them. Of course, they don't exist anymore, but cast them in a poor light. But honestly, who doesn't make mistakes?
Yeah.
Right. Give us a success story. Can you give us a success story? You're free to do that. We'll do
Sure,
one
absolutely.
more broad question, and we'll go to rapid fire questions. Success story of a product or an innovation that you helped in God's providence. You're not boasting, but you helped get down from the lab to the world of agriculture.
Yeah, so I would say, I'm still new on the commercialization side, right? So I've been in my current gig about 18 months.
Okay,
and
so you might not have a robust story yet. But
because a good thing to realize about ag innovation is that for these new products, the time to market, so the time from when an idea is generated to when you could actually see a product on your kitchen table or in a farm
measured
field,
in years.
10 to 15 years typically, if everything works well and it's fast.
You have something promising? Can
but
you
we
tell us
do.
about
We
something
have,
that we might see in a few years?
Absolutely. So
table?
we have this great program that we run at the Danforth Center called the Wells Fargo Innovation Incubator. So it's totally funded by the Wells Fargo Foundation. And going back to some numbers that you shared earlier, you were sharing numbers about we call it IN2, the IN2 program. So we provide non-dilutive grants. So that means that we're not taking an equity stake in a young company. Instead, they're given the money with I shouldn't say no strings attached, because there are programmatic elements that they have to satisfy.
You're not purchasing part of the company.
We're not purchasing part of the company.
Right.
We're providing them funding to help, and then we also provide them the resources and expertise of the Danforth Center and our scientists to help validate and develop and de-risk their technologies, right? And try to get them to market that much faster. And there is there's a St. Louis success story from last year that actually includes that program. So a local firm called CoverCress, which developed one of the first new crops in the Midwest in the last 20, 30 years. That company, CoverCress, was started from some retired scientists from Monsanto looking for a way to develop a cover crop, so crops that would be planted in the off season in the Midwest during the wintertime to protect your soil, improve soil fertility, decrease rates of erosion, which that's one of those big water resource issues in the Bay, right? In the Gulf of Mexico.
In the Gulf of Mexico.
That's right.
The huge tail on the Mississippi
That's
River
right.
you can see now.
The hypoxic zone, right, which has a lot to do with those rates of landscape erosion. But so cover crops reduce all of those negative externalities. Like we mentioned, the trick is that these programs that USDA has been running via those incentive-based opportunities, the rates of market adoption are pretty low. They don't have, a lot of producers don't participate because the incentive they receive is not actually sufficient.
It's not adequate for their for the outlay of labor and their machinery and so forth.
That's exactly right. And so these former Monsanto scientists realized that we needed a cash cover crop, right? Some sort of crop that could be harvested and sold.
Actually sell it. Somebody eats it, or an animal maybe eats it.
That's right. And so they developed this new crop. So using a plant called pennycress, which has traditionally been considered a weed across North America. Farmers have been fighting it in their fields for generations. It's very hardy.
So it's there.
It's there. It grows all over the place.
It grows easily.
And it's easy. It's unfortunately easy to grow. But through a variety of technological approaches, including like some accelerated selective breeding that we helped them with at the Danforth Center, they were able to identify the genetic trait in pennycress that was responsible for oil concentration in the seed. So those seeds are oil rich, but there wasn't enough oil to make it economically viable to crush and extract them. So they were able to identify that gene and then maximize the expression.
Put it on steroids.
That's right. Maximize the expression of that gene. Until now, they were able to actually, they've created a new crop, which they've called cover cress.
It's oil.
There's enough oil in the seed to make it economically viable to crush and
What would you use it
extract
for?
Biodiesel.
Biodiesel.
So they signed a commercial agreement with Bunge, which is a large strategic ag corporation headquartered here in St. Louis, and also Chevron. So a joint venture with Bunge and Chevron. And so CoverCress manufactures the seed that they sell to farmers. Farmers plant it in their fields in the off season to protect the soil. Then they harvest it in the spring. They sell what they harvested to Bunge. Bunge crushes and extracts the oil. They sell the oil to Chevron, and Chevron includes it in biodiesel to try to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas coming from our fuels.
An applause button, I would press the applause button. Right
CoverCress is an amazing story. It's a great success of the St. Louis ag tech ecosystem. Danforth Center and our scientists and our facilities were key components in that success story.
That's got to feel very, very good.
Agreed.
So let me switch to things that make you feel good. We'll go through our rapid fire questions. All right. The first question I think I want to ask you is maybe not totally rapid fire, but I'm just going to ask it this way. Is there a theme from the Bible or a Bible passage that guides you as you think about these things, as you meditate? You don't have to have, I didn't tell you I was going to ask this question.
No, that's
okay. So you might not have the answer, but if you do, tell us what it is.
So Genesis 2:15, Adam is created, and it says that God placed Adam in the garden to work it and take care of it.
Yes, right.
To work it and keep it.
Keep it or take care of it, right.
Yeah.
Well, nurture it is the idea.
And then, so that kind of an interesting passage, right, about kind of Adam's purpose. But what I think is so even doubly interesting is that then in Genesis 3:23, when Adam and Eve are banished from the garden, it says they were banished to work the land from which he was taken, to work the ground from which he had been taken.
And of course, the passage also mentions thorns and thistles.
That's right.
As well.
And so what I think is so amazing is that in both situations, right, pre-sin, pre-fall, and then post-sin, post-fall, he's still placed where he is to work and steward creation. And I think, at least to me, that speaks to a fundamental component of my role, which is, you would call it care, creation care. And for me, it's environmental stewardship, right? Stewarding the Lord's creation. And I'm convinced that that's one of the major reasons that I'm here.
That's good. I'll also say the way that passage Genesis 2:15, along with 3:23, as you say. Also gives a counterpoint to the misconception about the Bible, which is, it says, well, Adam and Eve were supposed to rule the earth and exercise dominion over it, which is true. And the word dominion is a very ugly word in our culture right now. But it also counters that by saying, guard it, take care of it.
That's right.
So we govern, we do, and we take care. That's great. So let me switch over then, if I may, to more explicitly rapid fire questions. So the first one is, what do you like most about your work?
I love working in agriculture because it's a unique industry full of really fantastic people.
If you had 1 minute, let's say it's a really long elevator ride at a conference with a newcomer to your field, which in this case is technology that draws on science and makes a difference in the world, what would you say to them? If you could say give one tip to a bright, young 23-year-old who wants to go into this field, what would you say?
So first off, I would say just, solid professional tip is to focus attention on building a collaborative professional network, right? Make network connections, nurture those connections, build partnerships where you can, because it is absolutely critical to other people will always be critical to your success.
That's right.
But I know you asked for one thing. I'm going to give two
Sure.
things.
Okay.
The other thing, and this is something that I realized when I was actually a research scientist at West Virginia University, is that there's a big difference between skills and gifts, skills and talents. And skills are things that we develop, we build ourselves through hard work. But talents and gifts, obviously, are things that we're given, I believe, by the Lord. And so, for me, it's taken me a long time, but I've realized what my skills are and what my talents are, and I'm leaning into my talents. And that's one of the reasons that I am in St. Louis working for the Danforth Center and working in the commercial sphere, is because I made the decision to spend more time on, and maybe more attention, maybe more focus, prioritizing those talents as opposed to the analytical skills.
Yeah. Next question. Is there anything people get wrong about plant research that you would like to correct?
Sure. So two things. Number one is that there's a lot left to do. There's a lot of work remaining. There are knowledge gaps that still remain about the interactions of plants with the soil and with microbial communities in the subsurface. There's a lot of work left to do. And the work is pertinent to improving not just the effectiveness of ag, so how much food we produce and how nutritious that food is, but also the sustainability of agriculture. So, again, minimizing those negative consequences to traditional production. So there's a lot of work left to do, and scientists, especially the scientists at the Danforth Center, are really kind of at the forefront of pushing those envelopes and trying to advance agriculture. But it requires every tool in the toolbox. And I think that there's been a cultural tendency in America, especially over the course of the last 20 years, to be reductive and to try to limit the number of tools that are in our toolbox as scientists. And genetic editing is the best example of that, right? There was this fervor over, transgenic plants Monsanto was producing circa 2010 and 12, and the GMO battle. And if you asked a person on the street, are you pro or con GMO? Everyone's like, we're against GMO.
Frankenplants.
And then you open their cabinets and every pack, of course. And
right.
But again, those techniques, those technologies are one of the reasons that we are able to feed 8 billion people in the world, recognizing there are people who still don't have their needs met. But
thank you for saying that.
It's core to the work, and so it's important that we leave all the tools in the toolbox and make all those tools positively available.
I like that. All right, last question.
Sure.
What do you do to relax?
I still spend time outside. The fun thing now.
You still play Frisbee?
I do still play Frisbee, but I will say that the change now, I have 3 little kids, so now I spend time outside with my kids.
You throw Frisbee wobbly and slowly.
Very slowly and easily, but I've got, my kids are young, they're 7, 5, and 2, and my 7-year-old and 5-year-old are getting to be pretty good Frisbee throwers.
Oh, yeah.
So it's exciting for me to see, but we hang out outside together as much as we can. That's my favorite thing to do. So.
Elliot, it's been a pleasure to have you here. Dr. Elliot Kellner, research scientist who tries to put the results of research to practice in the external world, taking care of creation and taking care of people. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Working with Dan Doriani is a production of the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis. We seek to promote faithfulness in the workplace, in education, in discipleship, and in the stories of believers who've applied their faith at work. If you want to put your faith to work and change your corner of the world, visit our website, the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis. Look for faithandworkstl.org. That's one word. We'll help you start a cohort with like-minded believers who also want to practice their faith at work. This podcast is donor-supported. To keep us going, please donate on our website. Maybe more importantly, you can support us by listening, by subscribing, by sharing, by liking us, by posting us on your favorite platform, or go old school and tell a friend.
My name is John Perkins, and I want to thank Zac Waggener for joining us today on the podcast to talk a little bit about his experience with the Center for Faith and Work. So if you don't mind, Zac, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I am a wealth advisor, a financial planner. I am a partner at Fortify Wealth, which is in downtown Kirkwood. Essentially, I help people make good decisions with their dollar, anything that involves a dollar sign.
Talk a little bit about, as a believer and working in the world of money, a lot of times there is a discomfort, like an inherent discomfort for Christians to talk about money, to have a large amount of it. There's sort of a dissonance there.
I'm still dealing with it, if I'm being quite honest. I'm a pastor's son, and my dad left. I was 7 when he left a relatively decent paying job with a good future to become a pastor, and to not only become a pastor, but in a small denomination in a small town. And so I didn't grow up without anything. We were just fine, but I grew up knowing we didn't have what other people had. And so it's this weird push and pull of when I started my career, I didn't want to become a pastor. I wanted to go earn. I am very entrepreneurial. I wanted to make money. But there's also this feeling that if you make money or more money than your father did, that there's a betrayal. It's this weird kind of push-pull desire versus guilt that no one laid on me. It was all self-imposed. But there's also this idea that, I don't know, that finances in general, I don't know if it's that wealth is anti-faith or anti-God, which I don't believe at all, but there's this push-pull that I feel quite acutely on a regular basis. And I think that if we really, the one place we can go to examine who am I in light of what God has done for me, am I a Christian? We can find some of the answers to that if we would examine where we spend our money. Am I on the throne, or is God on the throne? And I think those are some important areas, not necessarily to condemn ourselves, but to spend time searching ourselves and do we behave in the way we actually believe.
Like, multitasking is fine when it comes to tasks, but you can't really multitask your heart's priorities, right? I mean, it's like things have to stay in their lane or else things get really confused quickly. So we could keep on talking about that, but I want to redirect it back to faith and work specifically. And so given all of that context, what was it, maybe it's precisely because of the context, but what was it that led you to want to be a part of the cohort?
It was really outside of that, to be honest with you. To say I wanted to be a part of the cohort, it was something I was asked if I would participate in. And I said yes, mainly because I love Dan and his teaching, and I knew that it would be done well.
Like, to what extent had you really drilled down into how your faith in particular really helps inform, drive, intersects with your work? Where was it before? And then having gone through the cohort, how did it shift, adjust, change?
It's always something that's been on my mind. I would say, like, how do we go about our days doing secular work, but for God in a way? The scripture's clear, like, we are to be a secular person and a spiritual person. We are who we are. And so it's always on my mind, but never really thought about it more than that. What really happened is I have a client that I enjoy both as a client and as a friend. He was a client first and became a friend. And this particular client happens to be Jewish. He called me up one day and he started the conversation and he said, "You're a Christian, right?" And if someone starts a conversation like that, you're in trouble. You have something to answer.
Right.
And he had recently sold a business and had done very, very well. And he said, hey, I have this friend who's a Christian and he has 3 times more money than I do, but he doesn't want anything. And I know that if I sold my house and got the next bigger house, that I'd be happy. Or if I sold my boat and got the next bigger boat, that I would be happy. And I know that if, I would just be able to take this trip, I would be fulfilled. He says, but I'm not. And I keep wanting more. Why does my Christian friend not want anything? And I keep thinking these things are going to fulfill me that don't fulfill me. I was stunned because I had not a great answer.
Okay, so talk about how the experience of the actual cohort itself began to shape and inform some of your views on this subject.
Well, first, the curriculum was pretty good. Walking through the curriculum was good, but I think where I decided that I knew I needed to focus, there's this final project at the end that Dan hints about at the beginning, but doesn't really give a lot of direction for until later. And it was more through, we break out into the cohort, into discussion groups, and we talk about the things that are on our minds. It was in those discussion groups where the natural discussion of what we were talking about, whether it was their businesses or my business, started. We started to have conversations that just went towards the way we handle our money or our resources in general, the way we handle our employees, the way we handle what we do with our businesses, how we do our businesses, the way that the Bible and God impacts those things. And for me, most of my days are spent, most of my hours during the day are spent helping people with their money. And so this discussion naturally came through resources, and it became very clear kind of where I was going to spend my project time.
Really, one of the central parts of the cohort is a project, and the idea of the project is a specific, per the individual, application of one's faith to their vocation. And it begins to take shape over the course of the classes and the weeks that everybody meets. And by the end of the cohort, the idea is then to present and some, whether it's a document, page long or whatever, the plan for this project. And then after we disband, then folks are then going to integrate that project into their workplace. So, and the idea there is that ultimately we talk about things that seem very heady. They're theological, it engages our minds, but at the end of the day, what we're really about and what we want to see is that our faith has some practical application in the world, that it begins to take shape in our practical lived out lives, right? It's not something that just, we can have conversations about all day long, but then there's no point at which it begins to be real. So the project is designed to address that. So tell us about your project and what's going on with it.
So the project, I knew that it had to be a curriculum of some sort to walk believers specifically through the financial planning process as believers, that Jesus matters and Jesus has something to say about this. And it impacts us not only by what we do, but by how fulfilled we tend to be in life. But the challenge is there's rules-based that say, do this, do this, do this, that A plus B equals C. And I find that my faith journey almost is never linear. It's got much more depth to that. And so I became very overwhelmed. And so what I wound up doing for my project was trying to organize my thoughts in a way that then curriculum could be built on top of that, on those thoughts, or at least some sort of teaching that I could do, with a couple across the table as we went through the secular financial planning process that would piggyback for people of faith.
Tell folks that are listening why they should join a cohort and what you enjoyed the most about it.
Dan's teaching and his ability to weave scripture with experience and even secular wisdom, it really guided you through the entire cohort. And so just the teaching was fantastic. I just can't say enough about the curriculum itself. Secondly, doing it with a cohort and being with the same people being a part of their projects and discussing their projects was energizing. I made new friends. I had old friends that were very helpful in helping me develop my thought. So the interaction part of it was fantastic. First of all, other people's projects, some of them were as simple as how do I get partners to get along and lead, something as simple as how we treat each other. And other things were as grand as redesigning a healthcare concept. And so getting to be a part of those was very energizing, was a lot of fun. And it was just fun to be a part of it. So I guess that's three things. So the curriculum itself was fantastic. The cohort, being with other business leaders, learning from them, hearing from them, being involved, and then being immersed and learning about their projects and what they're trying to accomplish was energizing. Those three things are reason enough to get involved.
Well, that's fantastic. Thanks, Zac, so much, man, for taking some time today and
my pleasure,
chatting with us. So
glad to do it.